Is it better to buy a dental practice in a rural area or an urban one? The common wisdom the average buyer hears in Facebook groups and on Dental Town and other places is to make a lot of money, for sure go rural. My answer to this question for most buyers is, what do you want to buy? Do you want to go buy a rural practice? Fantastic, go do it. Do you want to buy an urban practice? You can be fantastically successful in a very urban location. In this video, I'm going to give you some considerations if you really are flexible and can go anywhere. If you really do have the option to go rural or urban and are trying to decide between the two, I can give you some context to help you make a wise decision. Let's talk rural first. This is why a lot of people say to buy a rural practice. Costs do tend to be lower in a rural area. Yes, staff tend to be cheaper, rent costs are lower, and the cost of living generally is better. In addition, it's generally true that street visibility is better for rural practices. You can just see the practice easier. A third reason often cited is the price of the practice. It is also generally true there are fewer buyers fighting to buy a practice in a rural area than an urban one. Supply and demand being what they are, if there are fewer potential buyers for an office, it's generally true that that office would sell for less than a comparable office in an urban area. So you have lower costs, better visibility, a lower sticker price for the practice, and that leads a lot of people to say, go rural. And they're not wrong, if that's where you do want to live. But let me give you some potential concerns about buying a rural practice. The first is the assumption that you'll be accepted into the community without question. A lot of times people move to a rural area because they already have a connection to the area. If that's you, fantastic. But if you're moving to a new rural area, you need to keep in mind that you're the outsider for a while. That transition may not be as smooth for you as it might be in an area where people aren't used to seeing the same faces over and over. It is also generally true that rural practices tend to be, on average, technically and clinically a little behind urban practices. There just isn't as much need to keep up with the latest and greatest software, hardware, and look and decor in an office when you're the only one in town or you're one of 7 practices in a smaller town. So as a buyer, you might be looking at a higher investment to bring that practice up to a standard of care that you're comfortable with. Now let's talk about urban practices. Here's generally why people say to avoid urban practices. They cite the higher costs. They cite the fact that there's all kinds of competition around you. There are just generally more buyers interested in living in the greater LA area than there are 100 miles outside of Topeka, Kansas. And again, all of those things generally can be true. Practices do have higher costs slightly in urban areas. The rent is higher, staff generally command a higher wage, but it's also true that reimbursement rates are greater and you can charge more as an urban dentist. Yes, there is a lot more potential competition in that area as well. And yes, the sticker price of those practices tends to be higher. But there are tons of reasons you might be interested in an urban practice. First of all, that may be where you want to live. You love going to the big city events, you love having a sports team close by, it's where you grew up, you're just used to a big city. If that's you, go for it. The bigger the city, the bigger the potential patient pool to pull from. And the easier the integration process is likely to be with that office. In short, there is no easy answer to rural versus urban. If you want to live somewhere, you can be fantastically successful in that location. The trick is, of course, if you want to be successful, you need to buy the right practice. That's where I come in. You can find all kinds of resources about this question and others at dentalbuyeradvocates.com. Yes, there are free resources, blog posts, podcasts, etc. But in order to find the right practice for you, you need advice tailored to your situation. Go to the website. I'd be happy to schedule a 15-minute call with you. dentalbuyeradvocates.com. Good luck.